Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we talk about Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, today's guest, joining me today, Dustin Humphreys, who is the education minister at St. Elmo Church of Christ. He's a graduate of Northeast State Community College, Heritage Christian University, and Lee University, and he holds an A.S. associate's degree in general studies, a B.A. in biblical studies, a master's in teaching, and Dustin, you also have a doctorate of education from Liberty University, and you served in the Marine Corps, a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. You're a full-time teacher of Bible history for the Hamilton County schools, and you've been married for, I don't know how long?
6 years, going on 7.
Going on 7 years, to the beautiful Chelsea, who's a nurse, and you currently reside in Chattanooga. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
You know, you're in rare company. You are only one of two people that have been asked to come back. So this is your second time on this podcast. The first time was, I think, during or pre-COVID or something. I can't remember exactly when time frame was there, but
yeah, that sounds right. I guess I didn't blow it the first time.
Yeah, you did. Well, no, this is actually your opportunity to redeem yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
From the first one.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I'm glad to have you back. You always have really thoughtful, insightful stuff to say, and You were here last Wednesday doing our summer series, speaking, and I was thinking at that point, I'm like, man, we need to have you back on the podcast and talk about some stuff that's relevant right now in the church. And you know, we're past the COVID stuff, so you know, there's some reflection there that I want to talk a little bit about. So this should be an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it, and so just make yourself comfortable, listeners. Make yourself comfortable and settle in for a good interview, hopefully. So obviously you work with kids on a daily basis, teaching them. That's a whole really interesting thing there, that you work for the Hamilton County school system, but you get to teach Bible. Mm-hmm. You're one of very few people within that system that does that, correct?
Right, yeah. We have about 30 teachers, and we're growing every year. I mean, the ultimate goal is to have a Bible class or a full-time Bible class teacher in every middle and high school in Hamilton County, and we're not there yet, but every year we get more and more, which is nice goal to have. I think when I first started, we had lower 20s full-time teachers, and now we're pushing 30. And like every year, there's a desire for it.
So how is that even legal? Because I can hear, like right now in my headphones, I can hear a lot of Christians going, "Yes, that's awesome," but I would imagine the other side of that would be. You have the people with, you know, the separation of church and state, and they're like, wait a minute, how is it that we have Bible teachers in our public school system?
Yeah. The way it's legal is that, I think it was in the 1980s, somewhere around there, it was actually challenged. Like there have been teaching, like in most places, they taught Bible for a long time in public schools. And then it resembled more what might you think of a Sunday school class. You would often have a Sunday school teacher from the local church come in and teach a class to elementary or something like that. Mm-hmm. But in the early 1980s, somewhere around there, it was actually challenged. And so someone actually came and said, hey, this is not legal. You can't do this. Mm-hmm. And it actually went through the court system in our circuit, and you can look up the ruling on it. And basically that ruling came down and said, you can teach the Bible in public schools within our circuit, but there has to be requirements. Like there has to be a teacher just like anyone else. They have to have a teaching license. They have to be, have all the appropriate courses in play that any other teacher would have. They can't be special. They can't be a Sunday school teacher. They actually have to be an actual teacher with a license. And they have to, and a couple things. One thing's really cool. The Bible can be the only textbook. Like we can make assignments and stuff, but the key text is the Bible itself. We don't actually give them a textbook about the Bible. We actually have the Bible. Mm-hmm. And then we do have to do it from a neutral standpoint. And so, I can't go in and actively be inviting people to my church. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of teach it from maybe more of a literature standpoint. But in the end, we still get to read the Bible and talk about, God's word in the classroom, and to a lot of kids that might not even believe that, but are interested. Yeah. It's surprising how interested a lot of these kids are in and what the Bible says, because I think a lot of them haven't actually ever read it.
Yeah.
But anyway, a long story short, and I'd say there's a need for it. This is not a requirement, but the one reason we do it we have it so extensive here is because we don't actually use tax dollars to pay our teachers here. There's a separate organization, Bible Schools, and we don't work for them. We work for Hamilton County Schools, and they raise money throughout the year, and they basically pay the county back.
Yeah.
And say we'll pay you back the money that you're spending on the Bible teachers, and the growth is dependent upon how many people are willing to give. And so we're able to grow every year because increasingly every year more people are giving, which means that the reason we have Bible programs tax-free is because we have so many people that want that in our community, which is a good thing.
So I meant to ask you this the last time you were on the show. Because you guys are in the school system doing this, does that open the door for other religions, let's just say Islam, okay, to come in and teach a curriculum that uses the Quran? Or let's just take it even a step further, because I've seen stuff like this happen where you have a satanic group that want to come in and say, well, if you're doing it, then we get the right to present stuff, not forcibly, but it's there for students. So does that open up the door for anything like that to happen?
I mean, I would say yes and no. Theoretically, yes. I mean, anyone could maybe try to potentially introduce anything. A lot of times, we don't really, I feel like in, say maybe in Georgia, as far as I know, they don't think they can teach the Bible down there. And it's not because there's a rule that says you can't. It's the fear of they're not in our circuit. And so that ruling doesn't apply to them because it hasn't made its way all the way up. To say the Supreme Court has been challenged to that level. It was settled only at the circuit. And so I was talking to someone down there years ago, and they were saying, probably one of the reasons we don't have it is because no one wants to be the first. And so it's not because you can't. It's because they know the first school that does it, there might be a quick challenge to that, and you have to go to the court. In Tennessee, we have at least a level of protection that if someone comes and says, how can you even do this? And it's like, well, the court has addressed this issue already.
Legal precedence has already been set.
Exactly. And so, but on another hand, what makes the Bible unique compared to, say, Islam or Satanism is that at the core of Western civilization, you're not going to find Islam or Satanism. Like when you look at our civilization as a Western nation, the Bible is so foundational. When I look, and we do this in class, we look at speeches, and especially we do a lot of Martin Luther King stuff. As he quotes from the Bible all the time. We make reference to all kinds of different books. I mean, the Bible is so embedded in our culture and foundation, you can't go anywhere. I mean, I'll quote from The Office because, I love The Office, the TV show, and it's amazing how many references they make throughout the show just in passing that are Bible references. Yeah. And the reason the Bible, I think, in American culture should have a precedence is not necessarily the religion of it. It's because it has had far more impact on our culture. Yeah. In the same way that if I go to Iraq or I go to Iran, I would not be surprised. And I think it would be good for them, I guess, I suppose. I mean, I'm not a Muslim and I don't believe in that. But from the same standpoint, I would expect them to teach.
Interwoven into their culture.
It's part of their culture. Yeah. And I think, honestly, if I was to live in a Middle Eastern country, when I was in the Marines and we went over there, we did have some courses on Islam and some Arabic phrases and some of the basic beliefs. Yeah. And not because I believed in those things, but if I want to operate in their culture, I need to know, at least have a basic knowledge of what the foundation of their culture is. So in the same way, the Bible as literature or the Bible as a text, a sacred text, is at the foundation. So even if you're not a Christian, you need to have at least a basic knowledge of this text. Right.
So in the school system, I mean, you're working with the youth and you're teaching this from a kind of like a historical sort of perspective, but you get to see or get a feel for the spiritual landscape of 9th through 12th graders. You've been doing this now for, you said 7 years?
Yeah, coming in on 7 years.
Okay, so, you've been doing this a while now, and you're seeing these kids coming through year after year after year, and you're introducing maybe for the first time to some of them, or a lot of them, the Bible. So I would say that could put you in a pretty cool position to get an idea or a feel for where our youth, at least in this area, where they're at from a spiritual standpoint. And I guess the question now would be, do I need to define spiritual for you? Because the question is, what's your takeaway from where youth are at from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, I guess it would all depend on what you mean by spiritual.
Okay, so what I mean is having an understanding that there is a God who created everything, and that there are objective moral standards by which the world is expected to acquiesce to understand. From the Judeo-Christian perspective of spirituality, we answer to God and God alone, because He is the maker, the creator, and we don't operate on subjective moralistic standards. So spirituality, all of that wrapped in the afterlife. Okay. So that's all part of it.
So I think there's a good mix, and I guess it would probably depend on where you teach, because even within Hamilton County, a lot of people don't realize that even depending on where you live in the county, you're going to have a different demographic of students. And so depending on, you might even ask different Bible teachers in the county, and they might give you a different answer on this, depending on where they're at in the county. And where I'm at, love it. I'm at Red Bank High School. We have a great high school. We have great administration. We have great teachers, a great student body. It's very diverse. We have students coming from all different walks of life. But because of that, we do have a variety of places that people fall on, maybe on the spectrum, because we do have some students that come in, and it's obvious that they do go to church in some capacity, and they do have a belief, maybe in God or in the afterlife. Maybe they're not firm in that faith, or maybe they don't even know why they think that. Maybe they've been raised in whatever church they went to, but there is, a decent amount of students who are more in the religion is almost it's almost like a fashion. It's like something that you do in your extra time to kind of fill out your personality. It doesn't seem to be core if they have one. I think there is. I don't think I've interacted with a ton of people, and I don't ask them whether they believe in God or not. I don't ever have that conversation with students. But when I first started, I was actually kind of shocked, because I had just grown up in church, and I had assumed, being in the Bible Belt and growing up in the Bible Belt, that there would be a bigger base of knowledge of the Bible. And it was a shock to me, coming in for the first time in the classroom, and a student not knowing what a Bible reference is. I assume, like, hey, let's go ahead and let's grab our Bibles. Let's just go up to Genesis 1:1. And, you just have some students kind of looking at you with confused faces. And I'm just like, it's Genesis 1:1, guys, let's go ahead. And it's like, what does that mean? Like, they don't even know, book, chapter, verse.
So never opened up the Bible.
Yeah, never. And even if they did, talk about going to church, like maybe I wouldn't ask them if they did, but sometimes kids volunteer that stuff. And so I was like, oh, wow, I have to recalibrate here. And so one of my first lessons is, what is the Bible? And, how do you navigate the Bible? And what is a book, a chapter, and a verse? And we go through the basics of navigation.
Yeah.
It's because a lot of kids, even the ones who maybe do go to church, and there are some exceptions that are probably very, very faithful, and they, from their Bible knowledge, I would assume they've had some Bible study at some point from somewhere, whether it be church or their parents. But there's a lack of Bible knowledge as a base.
I'm gonna pivot just a little bit, and because I'm interested in your observations about post-COVID church.
Okay.
Because now we're several years past that, And as I look back on that time frame where quite a few churches have shut down and have not reopened. They could not sustain. A lot of places did went to home churches. A lot of those that left the church and started doing the online stuff never came back once the churches opened back up. And so the geography of churches across this area, at least, kind of got shaken up a little bit. Some are thriving, and again, like I said, others never were able to open back up because of COVID. So I'm interested in hearing, what your observations are now that we're past that, as far as churches being able to pivot, those that did, and not only survive but thrive. What is it that the successful post-COVID churches have done, where they're now, either back up to normal things, or maybe even doing better than they were pre-COVID?
I've tried to put COVID out of my mind.
Sorry, I said that word a lot too.
I know you're fine. No, it's actually kind of interesting that you mentioned that question, and it's like, it's just been recently that's something I haven't thought about, like COVID in general, not necessarily that question. Yeah. Which is so interesting to think that I'm thankful we're kind of past a little bit of the craziness and the haziness that was that kind of period there for a couple of years, especially as being a teacher. Yeah. Because we had just as much disruption, if not more, in the everyday lives of teachers and students.
Well, and before you go further, I'm bringing this up because I'm going to circle back, or not circle back. I'm going to extrapolate some stuff based on your response, that I hope the listeners will find, if not interesting, at least something to think about and consider. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I think obviously COVID threw the church for a loop, and I think it could have been a positive in some ways, because it kind of it was like a sifting mechanism. Because I think we're at the point now that the people who have come back have come back. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying there's not hope. There's still always, the door's always open, and we need to be reaching out for people. Mm-hmm. But there was a slow comeback to where you might have the young people, like St. Elmo, we had a slow coming back to where we had the online stuff, and then we had the younger people that felt comfortable. Our elder said, you can do that. And then slowly, it was probably in a year before we had probably the majority that felt comfortable. And there was never like, you have to be here. Yeah. There was, I think, a little bit of grace given. Right. Because for some, for younger people, and this is an acknowledgement, I think, of people that are younger and healthier might not have that fear of being around each other. And so I think that was a key for churches, because I think some churches, and I don't like to stand in judgment of any eldership, because it was such a unique situation. I mean, who had ever seen that coming? Right. And some might have went really hard on, we're doing the masks, we're doing, I don't know, you have to have a ticket to come in or register to come to service. And other ones were just like, well, we're not going to do anything, and everyone can come, and we want you to come, and we say you have to come. Mm-hmm. I kind of fell in the middle there. Where it was like, and I thought, and this is my opinion, but like I said, I don't judge the ones on the far ends. Everyone did what they thought was right. But I think what we did was just kind of like, hey, younger people might feel more comfortable, and if you want to, you can. Mm-hmm. And as people get more comfortable with it, we're not saying you have to come back right now, but then I think we're beyond that now. Definitely with the vaccine that came out, that made some more people comfortable that wanted to get that vaccine, and that was fine. And now we're back. I think we've been back solid for probably 2 years. Yeah. I feel like for our congregation, we're pretty much everyone. There's no one staying home, and except for maybe an occasional sickness. Yeah. But out of that, I think there have been some good things. One big thing is stuff like this with, I guess, multimedia, with people's churches real quick pivoted. Yeah. Some didn't, but a lot of people did. They pivoted. Next thing you know, that people that were using iPhones, or that's what we did at first. Like, let's throw an iPhone up there and we'll live stream. Yeah. And that worked in a pinch. But even we have a better little system now than we had even then. I think a lot of churches put some investment into these tools which are great because now you don't stop using them that you got them.
Yeah.
They're still available for putting content on YouTube, putting content on Facebook, making podcasts like this, adding video. I think last time I did podcasts, we didn't have video.
Yeah, that's right.
And so
we didn't have a podcast studio either.
Yeah, right. And so there's some cool things like advancement in and technology that the church is kind of jumping in.
Yeah.
And I think also another thing was a rethinking of how we do church.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the sense of like, we're just going to abandon the biblical model,
right?
Nothing like that, but maybe a rethinking of, what is a tradition, a perfectly fine tradition, and what is actually, commanded things that we need as Christians to do. And within that, I think a lot of churches, when they were coming back to limit, like, hey, when we do have service, we're only going to have maybe a Sunday morning service. And since then, the question is, as more and more people have been coming back, the question has been, well, do we go back to it? Are we going to re-add that Sunday evening service? Mm-hmm. And that's probably the biggest change, I think, in some churches. And some churches went back to it. Mm-hmm. But even the ones that started doing things on Sunday evening again, a lot of those places, it looks different. Looks very different.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong. If you wanted to go back and your congregation felt like, hey, we really need that Sunday evening service again. We really enjoy that. It's very encouraging for us. I think the elder said this is good for our congregation. Go do it. It's great. There's nothing wrong with having 2 services. I have five services on Sunday. However many that your eldership and your congregation think you all need to do in your local area. But some congregations said, we think we can do it in a way that might be better for us. We're still going to have our worship service on Sunday. We're still going to be preaching. We're still going to be singing. We're still going to be giving. We're going to be doing all the acts of worship that we're commanded to do. But maybe when we come back the second time, maybe we can do small groups. Maybe we can have something different. Maybe do service projects, or maybe, all kinds of. I think, are y'all doing anything kind of along those lines? I know you're doing some small groups and stuff, things like that.
Yeah, to your point, we had to pivot. I think part of our deal was because where we're located geographically, we're not like in a neighborhood. We're a downtown community, so nobody geographically live. We're all commuting in, for some quite a ways, and so what that looked like for us was to bring in some of the elements that COVID forced us into, which was being in homes, and instead of everybody trying to get back on Sunday nights, we do small groups and we do service projects. We do other things within our small groups, and that has really built a deeper sense of community within the church that I think is vitally important.
And to that, it says you're meeting in homes and things like that. Yeah, and that's biblical. I think about that. Like, there's something about being in someone's home that's just different, than being in a building that we own together. If you look at it that way, like as a church, we own a building, and there's closeness to that.
You definitely get closer to people when you go and you're spending weekly time in their homes versus coming in here for an hour and into a building, and you do the pleasantries. Hey, how are you doing? And that's good. And we worship, and then we go home.
And there's something about it being a home, because you can tell when something's a home by the way it looks. Yeah. And it's more inviting. As a teacher, that's kind of one of my philosophies, is that I think a classroom should be beautiful. It should be inviting. It should look in a lot of ways like a home. And that's how I decorate my room at school. And this is not a hit on other teachers, because we probably don't get paid enough, and definitely don't get paid to decorate our rooms. And so when teachers do decorate their rooms, it's an act of love. Yeah. And so when teachers don't decorate the rooms, I don't judge them one bit, because I don't blame them. Right. Because it's extra time that you're not going to get paid for. Yeah. But for me, so a lot of times it ends up with, sadly, I wish you would pay teachers and give them the ability to make their rooms more inviting, is you might go into a room and the room is it's like a cinder block prison, almost, with just random desks. Yeah, that's not inviting. You don't feel like you belong there. Right. And I'm not saying the church. I think a church should be beautiful in some sense. Yeah, but when you walk into a home, it's different. There's a couch, and there's pictures, and the way people are sitting, it's more comfortable. It's like, and it almost invites you to get closer, right? than you would like on a.
That's
maybe
it,
a
exactly.
barbecue.
You're inviting people into your life, into a much more intimate setting. And I think, at its essence, that's what the church is supposed to be to each other, is intimate, in love with one another. It's family, right? I mean, and I think for us, one of the key takeaways with COVID and how we pivoted to that was it opened up that whole new avenue for us to explore those things and grow and be better for it. The reason that I ask this question, just talking about churches that pivot versus churches that didn't, and what lessons were learned coming out of that. And this is not conspiracy theory or anything like that. I mean, people don't think I'm crazy, but I think we're gonna have other instances like COVID, like shutdowns. I think that kind of is a litmus and for churches, and especially any church leaders that are listening to this, thinking about this in terms of this. I don't think this was a once and done. I think smart church leadership looks at what happened and thinks, okay, so are we prepared for the next time that this happens? And how do we not only not have to be reactive to it, but already be prepared? And if we do have to shut our churches again, we're not going to miss a beat. I mean, it's not going to be like scrambling, trying to figure out what we're going to do. We already have a system in place that is supporting a church gathering, fellowship, worship that can happen either in the building or at homes or, whatever that looks like.
I think that's very smart. I think, and I'm not going to say I don't think it's conspiratorial either. I think it's logical to say, oh, well, that would never happen again. It's like, even when you read the scriptures, right? You read Ecclesiastes, that's like Solomon's main point is that the world just repeats. It's on repeat.
Right. Nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new. And so if it has happened in the past, it is logical to conclude that something similar
or worse.
I mean, I think that way, or worse could potentially happen. I think you're right. And leaders should, not be conspiratorial about it, but have a plan. Think, if this is going to happen again, what can we do to do it better?
So how is that connected then to doing church outside of the Sunday walls, where we come into a building, we do worship, and we're check that box, and then I'll see you next week, same time, same place. How does that look as far as being a church community and doing church outside of the Sundays?
Just in general, like as today, or like in a scenario where we can't meet again?
Well, you talked a little bit about this on Wednesday when you were here, and that made me think of this question: is like, do church leaders need to be really stopping and thinking about we're not doing just a Sunday only thing. I mean, if we're trying to do what Jesus instructed us to do, we've got to be thinking way outside of those walls and setting up a system within our own church family that encourages that.
Yeah. I know y'all have had you've been using the theme word, koinonia.
Koinonia.
Yeah. There's 3 different pronunciations. You can. Koinonia is fine. That's the Erasmian pronunciation, probably the most common. But yeah, the idea of fellowship, the idea of sharing, of partnership, is a key word, and it comes up a lot in its noun, adjective, or verb form in the Bible. And I think the same thing when it comes to the definition of a friend. I think you can be very friendly with everyone. And I think Christians should be very friendly with people and have, but I think friendship, and this kind of goes back to people can disagree with me on this. It's kind of maybe more, I think it was Aristotle. They have like a true friend is someone who has the same end in mind. I can be friendly with a lot of people, but a true friend, a true partner, and that kind of brings back to Christianity. The reason that Christians are all, in a sense, true friends, true partners, and true sharing is that we all have the same goal. And I don't have to see someone every single day for them to be my partner necessarily. Now, and I say that in a sense of like, maybe we don't see each other every day. We're not members of the same local congregation,
right?
But we live near each other. and I consider us friends.
Yeah.
Even when we don't see each other all the time, because we have common ends, and you're willing to help me get there, and I'm willing to help you get there. But when it comes to local congregation, there needs to be a little bit of a closeness, I think, because you're seeing each other more regularly.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to the Bible. I know we live very busy lives, and I'm as busy as everyone else. And, there's times where, and I'm an introvert, I can get in front of a lot of people. And I do enjoy being around students all the time and talking to them, but it exhausts me.
Right.
I have to go home and I need to be by myself. And so I do enjoy going home and being by myself after a long day. But sometimes we do that so much with our jobs that we neglect the church and the mission. We kind of get so bogged down with life and all the worries of this world. And I do it like anyone else does. And so it's trying to set a culture that overcomes that. And I'm not saying, because we go to the Bible, they met day to day. I don't know if we could do that today. And the reason I say that is because, when you're looking at these ancient cultures, you might be looking at a small town where everyone knows each other and everyone sees each other every day. And the church all lives near each other. And so you can, to some sense, meet every single day. But now with cars, with advancement in transportation and cities growing, and this could be a negative, is that people don't go to church in their community anymore. And I see that as a negative. I think if we want to get to a place of where we're really spending more time, closer to the day by day, we need churches where people are living in the same community.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to find that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it is here at Central, but I mean, even at St. Elmo, I think, our congregation, we might only have maybe one or two people that actually live in St. Elmo that are members of our congregation.
Yeah.
And we have tons of people that come out, and faithful people. I'm not saying they're bad for doing this, but they come in, maybe they grew up there. Yeah. But the same thing, a lot of us will pass each other, even us. Like we live, I could throw a rock almost and hit the Red Bank Church of Christ. Yeah. It's literally right. I ran past it this morning on my morning jog. And I passed that church on my way. And I'm not saying I need to go to Red Bank or anything, but it's interesting that a lot of us don't actually live in the community where we worship. Yeah. And I think that, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it can hinder, because that limits. I mean, because if I'm driving 30 minutes, if I'm driving 40 minutes, that's a hindrance to suppose that someone lives just 4 minutes down the road from me.
Yeah, I think for us, because Central is unique in that we're not really in a neighborhood per se where people, it's very transient, because we've got a lot of apartment complexes in a downtown community, so people are in and out. So for us, the answer to that question, to try to capture that, was all of our small groups are geographically designed. So everybody that's in my small group live in the Northwest Georgia area or close to it. So we are in the same community, and we're coming together and we're doing the small groups in our community where we live. And we're trying to bring other people in that are in that community. At least that's the goal, is to bring the unchurched into the small groups and get them comfortable, with what we're doing, in hopes of being prepared in case another COVID comes around and we can't come in and do church in the church building. We do church where we've been basically doing it now for the past couple of years.
And that's a good idea. You're kind of setting up the framework. And honestly, by doing that, you're doing the work of a minister. It's like you're equipping the saints to do the work. Because when you have a model where, I'm not saying everyone has this model, or this idea, but there's a sense you come to worship to be served. In a sense, you come in and the sermon's there, the song leading's there, and then you leave and go home. But by having those little small groups, I'm sure that all those small groups have to have a leader who is maybe designated to at least prepare a lesson or facilitate the discussion.
Yeah.
But you're equipping someone right there. So that's going to keep the church going better than, And that's actually, honestly, that's long-term for even everyday normal issues that arise in a congregation, with a minister leaving, because sometimes a congregation, you can have a minister leave, and then that can just disrupt the whole thing, because a lot of the personality revolves around, for better or worse, sometimes the minister.
One person. Yeah.
But when you split that work up, and you have several small group leaders, that's a strength. And actually reminds me from my Marine time, that's the strength of the Marine Corps. Like, we were constantly taught that. I was in the infantry, and team leaders, that is the backbone, or the sergeant is the backbone of the Marine Corps, or the team leader. So the Marine who leads literally 3 other Marines. It's like, you're a team leader and you got 3 Marines underneath you. That is the core of the Marine Corps. The battles are won and lost because you have competent or incompetent small team, team leaders. Yeah. And I think the same thing can be applied here in the church. Is like, there's wisdom in equipping faithful men, to lead, and faithful women to lead women and children, and to build. And I think that's the work of a minister. And the minister's work is not just to preach, but to enable you to go out and do the work of ministry. So I think that's a great idea, by setting up that kind of system.
One of the other things, we were talking a little bit about this before the show, was this idea of isolationism. And certainly, another key takeaway from COVID was people getting into more of an isolated way of living, which is long-term horrible, because Satan uses that against us. And it carries over, too, into now a new paradigm where we're looking at the church, thinking about the standpoint of how much we should be sharing with our fellow brothers and sisters regarding struggles, sin issues, whatever it is. And I talked about this last Sunday. I think the current culture, I say current, this has been going on a long time. You got issues at your house, at your home, you've got marriage struggles, whatever sin issue that may be involved, that's a very private matter. You're keeping that to yourself. You're not going to come in and share that with your church community, because it's shameful, and you don't want to be embarrassed about that. So you deal with sin issues privately at home in your own little thing. And I talked also about a lot of family dysfunction because it's kept so private, and we don't lean into our church community. We stay isolated. It gets passed down to the next generation because we teach them that. We teach them that their struggles and their sin issues are something you don't share with your church. You don't share that. We keep that private. And so, we produce handicapped generations that don't know how to deal with struggles and sin issues in their life. And so they, instead of turning to the church, they turn to the world, and the world is not a solution to our sin issues. It only exacerbates our sin issues. So that's another piece of all of this that, I'm trying to kind of get out there and talk about, have people think about is just how isolated are we? And if anything, COVID should have taught us that that's a dangerous thing, and we need to change the way we do things from within the church community, like your own specific congregation. How much are you guys coming together and talking about and setting up a system where you have a safe space to go, a confidential space to go and deal with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's so on point. And what comes to my mind are I think 2 things. I think we've been sold almost like a miniature, watered down version of the prosperity gospel. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that I think there are a lot of people in the church that have this belief that if you struggle or if you don't have all the things, then that in some way reflects your faithfulness. Because if you were really faithful, if you really loved God, you wouldn't have financial struggles.
Right.
You wouldn't have this sin issue that you're having. Because if you really just trusted in God, you could just, you wouldn't have that struggle with that sin. And I think because of that, I think it makes people afraid to say, listen, I'm having a hard time with something right now. And that's, it's biblical. Was it James? Confess your sins to one another.
Right.
And, and I'm obviously not promoting Catholicism because they have a ton of issues But one thing, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but there's something about being able to go to someone and tell them your sins. Mm-hmm. That it's almost like, and obviously God is the number one person we go to, right, and we confess our sins to him.
Right.
But there is something about telling another human being, not that person can absolve me. I'm not making that argument, but at least sharing your struggles, because at least then that person can be like, oh, I'm glad you said that, because
I struggle with it too.
I struggle with that exact same thing. And even if they don't, they're like, yeah, but I struggle with, maybe I'll look up and tell you what I struggle with.
Yeah.
But there's a high likelihood they'll be like, I struggle with that exact same problem.
I never saw such unshackling and freedom as I did when I was a campus minister there, because they're not nearly as reticent about sharing the stuff that they struggle with one another. College students are. And, when it was great to see them share their struggles with one another, because now they kind of have, an accountability person to go to that they trust, and, they can get that guy and they can be like, hey man, I'm really, really struggling with this. Can you help me out? And they're like, yeah, come on over. And that, what happens when we get older and we become adults, I don't know, we forget that. We forget that there's church community that God designed. He didn't design us to be in isolation. He designed us to be in relationship with each other, mm-hmm, and to help each other carry one another's burdens, mm-hmm, right, to help. And I think our struggles and our sins and our temptations are all wrapped up into that. Mm-hmm. And, yes, we have bad players out there that, mm-hmm, have capitalized on, a person's pain. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's an outlier. But I'm thinking, in reality, we've tossed the baby out with the bathwater, mm-hmm, on all of that stuff, and we're missing some really key points in, what church community is supposed to be.
Well, and along those lines, like you're saying, like maybe it's a reaction to, and I get this, there have to be protections for people abusing that closeness, mm-hmm, that might come from that, and I think that's where you need strong leadership, to really be on top of the community and what's going on, and not letting someone be abusive. And if something does come up that is abusive, that those things are reported to the proper authorities. Because, sometimes we have, issues, maybe not just in the church. I'm sure there has been, but in if you're in Christendom writ large, where things are swept under the rug, as like, oh, this is a private Christian matter.
Right. And
that makes people afraid. Like, I'm going to tell someone that I've done this, that's bad.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at certain levels, or sometimes you have to let the proper authority take care of that, or you will lose the trust,
yep,
of everyone else.
Yep. And
I think that's important. But like you said, I think sometimes we've, out of fear, just threw everything out. It's like, mm-hmm, well, we're just not going to tell anyone anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably more damaging, because now we're bottling everything up and thinking I have to do everything on my own.
Yeah. I'm coming more and more to the conclusion how dangerous isolationism actually is, not only for families but for churches that can isolate themselves from the outside community. And you can't reach the lost if you do that. So, I think one of the key takeaways for us post-COVID was to take a lesson and understand what isolationism is and how we can push back against that. Mm-hmm. So.
I'm sure for a lot of people that was, my wife and I joke, like, we're both introverts in a lot of ways. And COVID, I'm not to make light of COVID, because there are people that did hard times, and there are people that did get COVID and did die.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. People that were in the hospital for a long time.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, it reset a lot of people. Mm-hmm. My wife and I, we were talking about the other day, like, she's like, it blows my mind that I used to always be going somewhere, and like as soon as I would get a day off from work, I'd be going somewhere, because it felt like I had to go to the store or do this or do that. But COVID kind of slowed everything down, and made people, which I think that's a good thing. But I think it also isolated people, because not everyone had someone
right
at home with them, or they didn't have a big family, and it kind of, everyone became like separate into their little bubbles.
Yep.
And so now the thing is, let's get us back together, and then do what we can now, like you're saying with your small groups, things like that, to prevent if something or when something does happen again, it's not going to isolate everyone again
Right.
and be just a scramble to figure out how we can just. I think for a lot of us, like it was just like, oh, everyone was behind the curve, like no one was expecting something like this, and so this time to be ready for it by promoting that closeness. I think that comes from, and then I think of the word partner, like koinonia. It's like partner is different than just like an acquaintance.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times in church we're more acquaintances.
Right.
I see you and I know your name, and maybe I know a few facts about you, and we should be partners.
We should be partners,
but we're not.
Yep.
And I think, like you were saying, the things you're doing there is like something to promote that closeness. And I can't think of anything. I mean, and even me, there have been times where like it's so rare, it's refreshing. You know, I've been in some Bible studies where people would say what they've been struggling with, and it should be normal. And I should be like, wow, thank you for sharing that. You know,
Yeah.
or maybe it's time for me to share mine, or someone else will jump in and say the same thing.
Yeah.
But I remember I can see one of the first times I saw that, and I was like, it almost like took me away.
Yep.
It almost made me uncomfortable.
Yep.
I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're sharing this with me right now.
Right.
But going back and thinking about it, I was like, wow, that was a really like a powerful moment. That someone was willing, like it showed how much they trusted us as a group. Because that takes a lot of courage to be able to tell people.
Sure it does, yeah.
But also there's something to in that situation, it was an all guys group. I think there are ways we can, there needs to be time for men to be together. Yeah. There needs to be time for men and young men and boys to be together. There needs to be time for everyone to be together. And all those will provide different opportunities, because, I might be able to say something to another guy that I would not feel comfortable
in a mixed
setting to say that. And so we need to be providing opportunities. And then also, the biggest thing is through example. Seeing other people do it.
Yeah.
When a young man sees an older man share and show his heart to other people, that's setting an example.
Sure it is.
And saying, look, I thought men had to, and that's the second thing of coming to earlier. I think American culture is this macho men suck it up. Yeah. And we don't express our feelings. We just keep our nose to the grindstone and we work. Yeah. And so I think some of these young men need to see strong men who keep their nose to the grindstone and work, but also realize I struggle with things, and I need other people on my side. And so I think the young men need to see that, and we need to be giving them opportunities.
Yeah. Really good discussion. Great thoughts. See, I knew this was going to be good. We sit down and have just really, really incredible. At least I think they're incredible discussions and things that are worth processing and thinking about. If you're listening or watching on this on YouTube, feel free to click the like button. Share this with other people if you think that they would benefit from it. Give us feedback too. If there's stuff that you would like to hear, or guests that you know of that would be willing to come on the podcast and sit down and talk with me, I would love to have them. So get the word out there. I always like to close out with a passage of Scripture. And so, Dustin, I'm going to let you do the honors and read or recite whatever you've got on your heart.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate the opportunity. Depending on when you talk to me, it changes.
Okay, yeah.
What my favorite passage or section is. I've been teaching through Revelation at St. Elmo recently, and it's really the first time I've ever read through it, like in its entirety, trying to take the whole thing in and then teach through it. And so my mind's kind of been in there. And there's two places. One is a verse, and one is, I'm not going to read the whole entire thing. But in chapter 1 of Revelation, and I encourage you to read this, there is the initial vision of Jesus, and it's an awesome image. It's designed to show the just awesome power and might of what it's like to be in the presence of the Almighty himself. And it's so overwhelming that John falls to his face as if he is dead. And when that happens, in verse 17, it says, and when I saw him, this is John talking, I fell at his feet as dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid, for I am the first and the last. I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys of Hades and of death. And the reason I love this passage right now is because it shows the awesome power and might of the presence of Jesus, but also the gentleness of his spirit. And that as Christians, we don't need to be afraid. His presence, like if you ever read C.S. Lewis, when they're talking about Aslan, who was supposed to be the Christ figure, he's like, oh, he was describing, he's like, he doesn't sound safe at all.
Yeah,
he's like,
right.
he's not safe.
Not safe, yeah.
But he's good.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the kind of image I think here, and it's the beautiful thing of when we're on Christ's side, we don't have anything to be afraid of.
Yeah.
He is there to comfort us, and his credentials is he is the first and the last.
Yeah.
He was dead and he is alive forevermore.
That's awesome. It reminds me of, he came to us as a lamb, but he's coming back as a lion.
Yeah.
So that's pretty great. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. And tune in again for our next podcast. But until then, be safe, be good, love one another, and remember that Jesus loved you so much that he gave his life up for you. Have a blessed day.